Hello and welcome to Mythic Mind Games, where we discuss video games through the lens of the Christian humanities. I'm Dr. Andrew Snyder, and I'm glad that you're here. Howdy, partners. Recently, I've been playing through Red Dead Redemption 2 as I continue getting my reacquaintance with video games. As I've mentioned in previous episodes, I took a long break, like a decade or so, when I really didn't play much of anything, as I just was I was engaged with other things, right? Engaged with career, family, education, all sorts of stuff. And so I really just didn't play video games. But as I've started to step back into this arena, mining them for the wisdom that they hold and just engaging with what I think is potentially a productive avenue of enchantment. I decided that one of the first new games, well, it's not really new, I guess, by today's standards, but it's new to me. One of the newer games that I wanted to check out was Red Dead Redemption 2. I've seen a number of clips here and there. I'm drawn in by the aesthetic of the Wild West. The cowboys are like the quintessential, American folk story. This is our mythology. It's a better way of saying it. That the Europeans have their knights and Americans have their cowboys. And so there's just something about this aesthetic that connects to with me on a deep level. And so I played Red Dead Redemption 2. Absolutely incredible game. If you haven't played it, I strongly recommend it. I have not played the first Red Dead Redemption yet, although I did play Red Dead Revolver way back in the day, which was the kind of spiritual precursor to the series now. But the second one is a prequel, and so while I understand that there's probably some enrichments and benefit that comes through playing the first one first, it's not absolutely necessary. At least that's what I was told, and that's certainly what I've experienced. It's a great story as it stands alone, and eventually I'll make it to the first one as well. Well, like I said, I was blown away by this game. For one thing, it's fun, it's enchanting. There's just so much that comes out of just exploring the wilderness, exploring the towns. Whether you choose to take an honorable path and be something of a reforming cowboy, or you play the role of just the dishonorable, hard-edged outlaw. Like either way, it's fun. But I definitely came to find that the honorable path is definitely more satisfying. And so that's how I decided to play the game, how I decided to beat the game. Since then, I've also fiddled around a little bit, being more of just a straight out outlaw, robbing trains, robbing stores. And I've definitely come to find that the honorable path is more satisfying, even though the dishonorable path is more fun. It's fun to rob trains and whatnot. Don't take that out of context of this particular focus. But I knew that this was a game that I wanted to discuss with you, and this is going to be a two-parter. And so in this episode is just me, and I want to get into what I believe are some of the most heartening as well as heartbreaking elements of the story. And in particular, I want to be discussing the role that Arthur Morgan plays, or Arthur Morgan being the main protagonist, your character. And so I want to talk about the role of Arthur Morgan in relation with Tolstoy's short story, The Death of Ivan Ilyich. And warning right now, there will be spoilers for both the game as well as Tolstoy's story in this episode. But you can make of that what you will. But I do think that on the main Mythic Mind podcast at some point down the road, maybe sooner rather than later, I'm not really sure. But we've been talking about having an episode on the death of Ivan Ilyich over on the main Mythic Mind podcast episode. For now, I'm really just going to lay out the major outline of the story as a refresher, or if you've not read it before. And then I just want to draw on some comparisons here between Arthur Morgan and the titular character of Tolstoy's short story, Ivan Ilyich. Now, the death of Ivan Ilyich begins after the death of Ivan Ilyich. And in the first chapter, it's like kind of like a prologue where you have some of Ivan Ilyich's acquaintances, some of his colleagues at the courthouse. He works in law, they all work in law, and they read in the newspaper that Ivan Ilyich has died. And they don't break into tears. Like they don't start mourning. I mean, they say some of the niceties that you might say when somebody when you learn that someone you know dies, but they quickly move on to what this really means for them practically in regards to their career, like what it means for them financially, what it means for them positionally, and so they almost instantly move to. Oh, it's a shame that he died. To now, so you're going to get this promotion now. You're going to take his spot. I'm going to take his spot. And so that they're more concerned with how's this going to affect me? How's this going to affect my career than they are concerned about the death of Ivan Ilyich. In fact, even Pyotr Ivanovich, who is the closest to a friend that Ivan Ilyich has, like even he is just kind of cracking jokes, and he's not deeply moved. And we're told that they all had the same thought that none of them expressed it, but they all had this thought somewhere. Maybe it was thought consciously, maybe subconsciously, but they all had this thought that it was Ivan Ilyich who was dead and not me. And so you have all these people. They have their good careers. They're financially stable. They are moving up now in the world, right? That a number of them are going to be getting promotions with the death of Ivan Ilyich. But when it comes to the existential question of what does it all mean relative to the fact that just like Ivan Ilyich, I too am going to die. That's just not something that they're willing to come to terms with. And so they keep shielding themselves from that reality. It's he who died, not me. This death has nothing to do with me. His mortality has nothing to do with my own. Well, eventually they make their way over to the funeral service and they pay respects to his wife, the widow Praskovia Fedorovna. And even then, his widow, Praskovia Fedorovna, she calls Pyotr Ivanovich over for a kind of secret meeting, not secret, private meeting. That's what I'm looking for. They have this private meeting, and they both just they engage in the kind of conversation that you would expect that Ivan Ilyich's friend and widow would have. And so they're just chatting. Oh, it's such a shame. Pyotr Ivanovich says, "Did Ivan Ilyich suffer at the end?" And Praskovia Fedorovna says, "Well, yes, he suffered. That he was just screaming incessantly for 3 days at the end." And so she is far more concerned with her own inconvenience that she faced in light of the death of her husband than she is concerned with the death of her husband. He was a nuisance to her. And so, just as they are first and foremost, his friends are first and foremost concerned with just their own earthly material well-being, so too is she. Like she obviously did not care very deeply for her husband. She's kind of relieved that he's gone, but she can't say that because she feels like she's bound by social propriety to mourn and to say certain things, just as Peter Ivanovich is saying certain things. But none of them, like it's all on the surface. It doesn't come from the heart. They're not having a real conversation with each other. And in fact, we eventually find out through the course of this phony conversation that the only reason why Praskovia Fedorovna is trying to talk to Pyotr Ivanovich is because she is hoping that Pyotr Ivanovich can get more money out of the government pension for her. And so, just as with his friends, she's concerned about what is this going to mean for me materially. And as soon as Pyotr Ivanovich says, yeah, that's probably not going to happen, Praskovia Fedorovna says, "Oh, okay, well then I better go," and they just leave. And so, just neither of them are having a real conversation with a person. They're both just engaging in social propriety that's meant to cover up their self-centeredness. Well, toward the end of this first chapter, you have Peter Ivanovich waiting for a car outside, and he's standing there next to Ivan Ilyich's butler, a guy named Gerasim. Now, Gerasim, who is really the only authentic person for the majority of the story, that he says something pretty profound. Peter Ivanovich says, it's a terrible business about Ivan Ilyich dying, and Gerasim says, basically, it's going to happen to all of us. This is God's will. And so he recognizes the inevitability of death. He has this memento mori idea that even though of all the main characters in the story, Gerasim is the lowest station, He is the only one who has actually come to terms with his mortality. He is the only one who's living with purpose. And so we come to find that his life, as lowly as it may be, is far, far more meaningful than these upper middle class lawyers and government workers. But after Gerasim makes this proclamation about the inevitability of our mortality, Peter Ivanovich just doesn't really have anything to say, and he just leaves, right? Because he's trying to avoid this reality. In fact, just a little bit ago at the scene, he's looking at the body, he's looking at the corpse of Ivan Ilyich, and he starts to just kind of panic, like because he's starting, if something's bubbling up within him, he's starting to look in the face of mortality. Tolstoy tells us that that the body was giving the message to Peter Ivanovich that dead bodies always give, right? Namely, that you too will die. But instead of taking that message to heart, Pyotr Ivanovich says like that's terribly inappropriate, and then he just reminds himself, oh wait, it's Ivan Ilyich who's dead. It's not me, and so he just keeps fleeing from this reality where if he can, Gerasim is the only person who is a person who recognizes people as people. Well, and then we start to get a backstory of Ivan Ilyich, and at that point we're going to work our way up for the rest of the short story up to the death of Ivan Ilyich. So Ivan Ilyich, by all estimations, was a mediocre guy. I mean, he was a middle child. His older brother is very successful. His younger brother's a deadbeat bum, and so he's right in the middle. He got his first job in law by essentially his father got him the job, and so this is a guy who really doesn't have a lot of agency. And in fact, if you've read That Hideous Strength, I see a lot of common ground between Ivan Ilyich and Mark Studdick. I strongly recommend reading those books side by side. And so Ivan Ilyich, he has a decent job. Eventually, as he's just climbing the social ladder, he's engaged in all these society parties, and he meets this woman named Praskovia Fedorovna. Now, Praskovia Fedorovna, we're told, was moderately attractive. She had a decent amount of money, and she liked Ivan Ilyich. And that's enough reason for Ivan Ilyich to get married. And in fact, that's basically how Tolstoy laid it out, that she had this standing, she liked him well enough, and so they got married. And then we just kind of move on from there. And so obviously, Ivan Ilyich didn't love her. He didn't even ever really commit himself to her. It was just, this is the next thing that I do as a member of society. It's time for him to get married, and so he gets married. And at first, things seem to be going okay, and that's because they're both able to keep living basically as they were before. I mean, when you get married before having kids, there's only but so much life change happening. Now, okay, don't misunderstand me. I should be careful when I say that. That obviously there is a major life change to get married, and that's obviously the case. But at the same time, when you don't have kids, like there are only but so many responsibilities that you have as a family. Like you can still, for the most part, like keep doing the things that you want to do, right? And just do them together. But eventually, Praskovia Fedorovna gets pregnant. And at this point, their marriage really starts to go downhill because now Ivan Ilyich has some real responsibilities. And this is not somebody who's been willing or able to take responsibilities. And so he basically just continues doing the things he wants to do. Goes to all the society parties, hangs out with his friends all hours, works all the time. He really doesn't spend any time at home. Well, Praskovia Fedorovna, especially as the pregnancy continues, she spends more and more time at home, and she's not feeling well. They get in a lot of fights, and he just thinks that she's just being a nag, and she thinks that he doesn't care about her, which is largely true. And so this is just begins, I mean, the functional end of their relationship. I mean, they continue together, but they're just always at each other's throats. They never understand each other. And this is, in large part, I mean, don't get me wrong, she's no heroine here. Like she's got her own problems, but at the same time, it's far easier for me to be sympathetic to Praskovia Fedorovna because he is such a bad husband and father that it's natural that resentment would grow in her as they continue down this path. Now, that doesn't justify her. She is not going to turn out to be an incredible wife for her own sake. But again, like I have more sympathy for her because I get it, even if it's not necessarily excusable. And so she continues to get just embittered toward him, and then he just, turns around by getting more invested in work and spending less time at home. And eventually he decides he needs to make some more money, and eventually he gets the job alongside Pyotr Ivanovich in gang. And at one point, when he's setting things up in his new apartment, he's decorating everything to meet the aesthetics of the upper middle class, those who want to look far more wealthy than they actually are. And so, again, lacking agency, but wanting to be noticed, he decorates his house just like everyone else, right? In trying to stand out, he ends up being just like everybody else. And he's trying to manage this complete control over his life. And all of this is just because like he wants to be somebody. I mean, he wants to be noticed. He wants to be noticed as a person. That's all he's ever wanted. But he doesn't know how to do that because he's unable to notice his own self. He doesn't know who Ivan Ilyich is. He spent his entire life building this mask, this illusion, this caricature of what somebody in society is supposed to look like. And in so doing, he's failed to recognize, or he's failed to ask himself the question, who do I want to be? Right? If you don't ever ask yourself that question, like, what is it that I really want? Who is it that I really want to be? Then eventually you'll find that you've spent far too many years of your life trying to dress up a ghost as if you could. But every time you put on the new garments, they just fall to the floor in a pile of nothingness. But nonetheless, that's exactly what he's trying to do. And so he's trying to decorate his apartment, get everything just right. And at one point, one of his servants is hanging some window treatments, but he's not doing it exactly in the way that Ivan Ilyich wants. Ivan Ilyich has to like micromanage everything about this decorating. I mean, even when he was at work, he's like daydreaming about how he's going to decorate his apartment. And so he has to have everything to the perfect standards of this image that he's trying to construct. And the servant's not hanging up the window treatments in the right way. And so then Ivan Ilyich says, okay, so let me do it. And so he gets up and he hangs the window treatments, but then he falls and he hits his side. And he comments that, if he weren't such an athlete, that might be a major issue, but I mean, he'll be fine. But of course, this is going to be the beginning of the death of Ivan Ilyich. And so as time goes on, he starts to feel this pain, this sickness. He's having a hard time eating. He's getting more irritable. That there's obviously something wrong here, but at first he doesn't want to recognize it. And eventually he has to recognize it because he's going to go through these spirals of kind of debating with himself, of denial and despairing acceptance. And this happens on a number of different layers. And so first it's, am I sick? Am I not sick? And eventually the I am sick, like that bubbles up and to the point where he can no longer deny it. And so he is sick. Well, his wife makes him see a number of doctors, and none of these doctors really know what's wrong with him, or rather, they all know what's wrong with him, but they all know different things to be wrong with him. And so there's no agreement on what's wrong with him, let alone what kind of treatment he should pursue. And none of these doctors really care about him. None of them are listening to him. They're just concerned about working out the puzzle. That's what they're interested in, but they're not interested in him as a person. Which is, I guess, poetic justice, maybe irony, because previously we're told that what Ivan Ilyich loved about his job as a civil magistrate, is that he was able to pull people into court and that he could hold their life in his hands and he could decide whether to let them go or to destroy them. Now, to be fair, I mean, he never exercised his power to unjustly destroy somebody, but he reveled in the fact that he could. And so he reveled in this illusion of having power, because he didn't have power over his own life, he reveled in being able to exercise that power over other people, but he was too much of a coward to even play the tyrant. All he wanted was this illusion of power. His whole life he's been chasing an illusion, all because he wants to be known and he wants to be noticed, but he doesn't want to take responsibility. Well, now these doctors are doing the same thing, that they are reveling in their power over this man, over this case, rather. That's even a better way of saying it. They reveled in their power over this case, but they weren't actually interested in him. And so he keeps asking this question to the doctors. He says, is this serious? Am I going to die? And they just think that's an inappropriate question and they don't want to entertain it. But that's the one question that he wants to know. That once he knows for sure, yeah, okay, I'm sick. Now he wants to know the question, am I going to die? This is the next level of the spiral. And he goes back and forth, right? Sometimes he has good days and he convinces himself that he's getting better. Other days he has bad days and he comes to the realization that I'm not getting any better. The treatments aren't working. I am indeed dying. And so this death just continues to haunt him. In fact, there's one chapter in particular that's just very haunting, where Tolstoy keeps talking about how he would ignore it, but it would keep rising up, it being his realization of his own impending mortality. And so he goes from the spiral of am I sick to I am sick. He goes through the spiral of am I dying to I am dying. And now he's going to go through the deeper existential spiral that's going to lead him to recognize what it is that he is, what it is that he's always wanted to be. And so he begins asking questions like, okay, what is it that I want? And he answers himself and he says, well, what I want is to be better. What I want is to live. And then he follows up in his own internal monologue. He says, live how? Well, how I've always lived. But then as he says that, that despair starts to rise up and he's starting to think like, wait a minute, how I've always lived, but what I've always lived is absolutely miserable. And he starts thinking back over his life, over every major step that he's taken. And he recognizes, like back in school, that the groups that he was in, that he wasn't in because he actually wanted to be in those groups or he actually liked those people. He was in the groups that served his advancement in society. He was in the kind of groups that he felt like he ought to be in. And that's how he navigated every step of the social ladder, that he engaged in relationships, the groups, the outings. He did the things that someone needed to do in order to be somebody. And again, if you've read That Hideous Strength, there's some very strong Marxitic connections here. But eventually he comes to recognize that he hasn't actually been happy. Despite the fact that he's been pretty successful in his career, at least, he hasn't really been happy for a very long time, not since childhood. But over time, who Ivan Ilyich is as a person by nature, by nature I mean like true to what it is that he's supposed to be, actually supposed to be as a human. Like that gets covered up over time through the artificial construct of societal identity. But at this point, he recognizes that he's always yearned for something more. He's yearned for something real. And so he goes from I'm going to die to what do I want? And now he recognizes what I want is not just to live. What I want is to live well. And so he's trying to deal with what that issue is. And, as his disease continues to pick up and he starts to approach the end, well, now he starts asking the question of what do I want? Not just what do I want, but what should I want? Right now he moves on to what should I want? So now he's engaging in ethical reasoning. He's putting himself under an ethical standard. And he's recognizing that not all desires are equal, that there's certain things that he should want. And this really develops as he approaches the very end of his life. And we're told that he suffered for 3 days, that his death was carried out over the course of 3 days of absolute agony. And that's going to be significant, but we'll probably get more into that, into some of the symbolism here when we talk about Ivan Ilyich on the main Mythic Mind podcast. But he suffers for 3 days. And then at the end, he starts to recognize that he lived his life the entirely wrong way. And so now that ethical question of what should I want has gone on to I haven't lived in the way that I should have. I haven't wanted the things that I should have wanted. That all along I've yearned to be somebody real. I've yearned to be someone authentic, somebody who's capable of noticing himself. I've yearned to be a person, a substantial person, and not just a ghost of societal standing. But I've yearned to be a substantial person. And the Lewis connections are all over, right? There's some strong, great divorce connections here when we talk about the difference between his ghosts and the solid spirits. And so he's yearned to be someone solid, not someone illusory. And as he approaches his death, he has this literal come to Jesus moment where this is somebody who hasn't been terribly religious despite living in a religious environment, religious culture. He is not somebody who's been very religious, but right at the end he recognizes that he's lived his life in the wrong way before the eyes of God, and he And he looks at his son, he looks at his wife really for the first time, and he recognizes that he didn't do right by them. And he tries to say that he's sorry. He tries to say, "Forgive me," but he can't manage to get the words out. And he consoles himself, saying that it's okay that he couldn't get the words out because he who most needed to hear the plea for forgiveness heard it. And so at that point, he's able to stop struggling against death, which is described like, somebody who's throwing a sack over his head and dragging him against his will. Well, no, now he feels peace because there is no death, Tolstoy tells us. He is now able to be received into the fullness of life. And as he dies, the final words that he hears from the room around him are, "It is finished." And that's how the story ends. And so what you have here is a man who is but a ghost of a man, but a man who's yearning to be real, yearning to be someone of substance. He's a bad man who wants to be good. Now, he's not bad in the sense of being like a gross villain who's terrorizing the town, but he's a bad man in that he's not what a man is supposed to be. He's not authentic to what it means to be human. He doesn't know who Ivan Ilyich is. He's a bad husband. He's a bad friend. He's a bad father. And so this is, I think, something that Tolstoy does brilliantly in that he demonstrates what a bad man looks like in the everyday. It's not always the gross villain. It's not always the serial killer or the Hitler or the Stalin. That no, sometimes a bad man is actually quite ordinary. In fact, he may even be you or me. But despite being a bad man, he's someone who wants to be a good man, but doesn't really know how to do it until the very end. Now, as I was playing through Red Dead Redemption 2, there is a certain point at which Arthur Morgan starts to get sick. And eventually he just collapses in the middle of town and he's dragged off to the doctor where he finds out that he has tuberculosis. And he's told this is serious and that he's probably going to die. And so for the rest of the game, Arthur Morgan, he's dying and he increasingly comes to recognize the fact that he is dying. And this is why, especially from this point on, the game is so much more compelling when you play an honorable path because the story is really trying to push you in this direction. The story is trying to help you recognize what Arthur Morgan is recognizing, that the things that he used to live for, the things that made him a bad man, that preying on other people, that even seeking to be somebody in this gang that he's been running with, this gang that he's been running with since he was a kid, the something like the only family that he's known, but it's actually a terrible family that his whole life's been spent trying to be somebody in this gang, especially to this terrible mentor who plays a father-like role to him, but just that father-like. He's not very fatherly, really. And so Arthur Morgan, he wants to be somebody, but he goes about it in all the wrong ways. He is a bad man who yearns to be something good, but he just doesn't know how to do it. Well, as he increasingly comes to terms with his own mortality, he starts to become a good man. He recognizes that things that he used to want are not what he should have wanted, right? He's able to ask himself, have I wanted the right things? Like, how do I want to live? How should I be living? And so now we get this redemption arc, and hence the name of the series, right? Red Dead Redemption. And so we get this redemption arc where now he starts to yearn for goodness. He starts to get a better sense of what goodness is. Now, it's not a Christian game, at least not explicitly. And so he's not going to have this great conversion experience, although there's some degree of religion that plays into it. But really, what you have is Arthur Morgan looking at the life that he's led, recognizing he's been a bad man, and now his understanding of goodness is I'm going to start moving in a different direction, the opposite direction of that, which is, I mean, if you don't know what goodness is, that's not a bad way to go about it because often badness is more easily recognizable than goodness. Like I talk about this a lot in my philosophy classes, when I teach in the public university, that as much as everyone claims to be a relativist, like we all recognize gross evil when we see it. We all recognize that it's bad to commit murder. Like it's bad to do any number of things, right? I mean, push an old lady into the middle of the road. Like that a lot of things that everyone recognizes are just bad. And so, if we don't have a firm understanding of goodness, as I would propose, and moving in the direction of the beatific vision, the font of all goodness, like if you don't have that, then at the very least you can start to move in whatever direction is the opposite of what is clearly bad. Like that's at least a start. And so that's really what Arthur Morgan does. And man, it's short of playing the game yourself. It's hard to communicate just what a strong, compelling job the writers of this game do in portraying that redemption arc and helping you to really feel it, to experience his sense of regret and longing to make things right with the final bits of breath that are quickly being expelled from his lungs. It's not a one-to-one connection between the story of Ivan Ilyich and Arthur Morgan, but I do think that both of them are approaching the same basic archetype of coming to terms with mortality and letting that renew the way that you're engaging with the world around you. Right? I mean, there's this medieval Latin phrase, Memento Mori, remember that you will die, or remember your death. And it's important to always have this reminder in front of us, not in a morbid sense that causes us to forego our responsibilities and our enjoyment in life, but actually this reminder to embrace the responsibilities and enjoyment we can have in this life because this life is fleeting. In many ways, like in the long run, it's already forfeit. And so what we need to do is to redeem that life by living well, redeem that life by being a good person. And I don't just mean that in sort of like a generic, subjective, be good according to your, whims of morality. What I mean is like live in the way that a person is meant to live. Aristotle would say what that means is you live a life according to reason and virtue. The Westminster Catechism says that the chief end of man is to glorify God and to enjoy him forever. And so when I talk about being a good person, what I mean is you fulfill the form of what a person is supposed to be. And I think that this game does provides a very strong, a very compelling case for arguing that video games can deal with significant existential issues, significant issues that at the very least approach the literary, or maybe we even want to say that they can echo the literary, that they are artistic endeavors that can connect us to things that are true, good, and beautiful. And that, I think, is where I'm going to leave this off for now. Next time, we'll have more of a just general panel conversation on this game, what's enjoyable about it, what's enriching about it, what wisdom we can mine from it, and just kind of wherever things go from there. As a reminder, this is only one branch of the Mythic Mind Fellowship. We also have our main podcast, simply called Mythic Mind, which takes a primarily a literary focus, but it's also kind of a staging ground for trying out new ideas that potentially move into more branch shows like this. It's really just the main hub of what we do. And so make sure you subscribe to the main Mythic Mind podcast. And then also we recently launched the Mythic Mind Movies and Shows podcast, which does exactly what it claims to do in the title. It's much like this show, we're looking at more popular media through the lens of the Christian humanities, but for that show, it's obviously dealing with movies and shows. And right now we're working on a Star Wars series, and after that we'll go. I don't. Oh, we'll see where we go. We'll kind of popcorn around a little bit with ideas on that within the fellowship. And if you enjoyed this episode, you enjoy the broader work that we do, some of it, and you want to see more of it happen. Maybe you even want to participate in some of it, then I welcome your support over on Patreon at patreon.com/mythicmind. Any level of support, even $5 a month, will give you early and ad-free episodes of all these different podcast shows, all delivered into one single patron feed. You'll also get full access to our Discord server, which is where most of our in-house conversations take place. And that's where we do a lot of our planning, that are just general conversation about different topics. And also, you get it as a patron, you get open invitation to any episode of any of these shows that interest you. And so you get all of that just for subscribing at $5 a month. Now, if you subscribe at a tier 3 annual level, then you get all of that, plus you get admission to all of my courses that begin within that term. And so right now that includes Plato Stoicism Until We Have Faces, which is coming up next. In the fall, we have the Elder Scrolls and Philosophy. And at the beginning of 2026, we have the Silmarillion. And we may have one more course within that term at this point as well, but definitely those three. And so if you're interested in one or more of those, as well as everything else we have to offer, that's going to be the best deal for you. Get that tier 3 annual patronage. But again, if you don't want to go that far, if you just want to give me $5 a month to get plugged into this community, I definitely appreciate that. I could not do all this stuff without patron support. So patreon.com/mythicmind. And if you want to provide me with a one-time tip, you can use the Buy Me a Coffee platform. Find a link for that in the show notes. Next time, we will return with more Red Dead Redemption 2. But until next time, Godspeed. The Elder Scrolls in Philosophy, a 6-week course beginning in September 2025. I don't play many video games these days, but there are certain titles that have stuck with me, enchanting the mind of my youth and never entirely fading away. One of the chiefs among these titles is the Elder Scrolls, namely Morrowind, Oblivion, and Skyrim. The level of artistry, mythology, and lore of this universe is vast, and provides a strong representative for asking the question as to how video games might relate to literature as an art form. Where might it rise to such a level? Where must it fall short? And what unique advantages does it possess? For this 8-week study, we'll be seeking to answer these questions while analyzing various elements of this franchise, specifically focusing on content related to Morrowind, Oblivion, and Skyrim. We'll be taking a look at the philosophy of RPGs and considering the philosophical implications of character creation and formation in an open-ended series such as this. And we'll be looking at the relationship between in-game, religion, lore, and ideas with our primary world, philosophical, and religious concepts. Each week will include 1 to 2 videos addressing these topics, ongoing Discord conversations, and live meetings. You are also encouraged to spend at least a little time playing one of these titles each week as a launching pad for conversation. Join us in Tamriel that we might better understand our primary life here on Mundus. Enroll today by going to patreon.com/mythicmind and checking out the shop. Or you can access all courses that begin during your subscription period if you purchase a Tier 3 annual subscription. Get that Tier 3 annual subscription and I'll give you that special code for your all access pass. I hope to see you there.